A billionaire sat in a cold gray holding cell, his wrists pressed by steel handcuffs. Outside, the city roared beneath rain-streaked glass, neon colors warping in the storm. Cameras flashed through the fogged window, desperate to capture the moment. The billionaire's face, usually composed, was now etched with a mix of shock and pain. Across from him stood a little girl, maybe 8 years old, her eyes wide, her clothes damp, clutching a frayed stuffed rabbit. No one spoke. The only sound was the slow, relentless ticking of a clock mounted on the concrete wall. The girl met his gaze, her innocence a sharp contrast to his fallen power. He wanted to speak, to say anything, but his throat tightened. Through the one-way glass, figures in suits watched, faces grave, arms crossed, waiting for something. An answer, a confession, redemption. The billionaire blinked away tears. He had built an empire that spanned continents, crushed rivals, rewritten futures. But in this moment, he was powerless. The girl's gaze never wavered. Somewhere outside, thunder rumbled, and the city's lights flickered. The billionaire's reflection glimmered beside hers, a titan undone by fate, a child untouched by his former glory. The silence was more deafening than any courtroom verdict. Someone whispered, "He built an empire, but he couldn't save her." The world would never forget this image, this paradox. A man who conquered everything but lost what mattered most. The billionaire tried to remember the last time he'd felt real fear, the kind that grips your chest and refuses to let go. This was not the fear of losing a deal or public humiliation. This was the fear that no amount of wealth could dissolve. He looked at the little girl, her hair damp from the storm, and realized how out of place she seemed among these walls and shadows. The agents outside waited in silence, monitoring every breath, every twitch. The billionaire's mind raced, recalling the endless meetings, the impossible deadlines, the sacrifices made in pursuit of power. He had always thought himself untouchable, a man above consequences, admired and envied in equal measure. But now, with the city lights casting fractured rainbows on the concrete, he felt impossibly small. The girl's gaze softened, as if she saw not a monster, but a man lost in a storm of his own making. He wanted to speak, to promise her safety, but his voice died in his throat. Outside, the storm raged on. Somewhere, a world waited for his downfall. In this cell, he finally faced the cost of his empire, not in dollars, but in the unspoken distance between a man and a child. The rain pounded the glass, a relentless drumbeat echoing the finality of the moment. In the world outside this holding cell, the billionaire was a legend, his story told in glossy magazines and stock tickers. In here, he was just a man stripped bare, his empire reduced to rumors and headlines swirling in the rain. The city's pulse felt far away, muffled by concrete and steel, every sound heightened. His own breath, the girl's restless shifting, the agent's muffled voices beyond the glass. Time slowed to a crawl. The billionaire studied the child, her small fingers clutching her rabbit as if it were a lifeline. He wondered what story she carried, what loss brought her to this room. Had his hands, so used to closing deals, opened a door that changed her life forever? He looked down at his cuffed wrists, and for the first time saw not instruments of power, but hands capable of harm or healing. Guilt washed over him, sharp and unrelenting. The world outside craved a spectacle, but inside this room only two stories collided, his and hers. The billionaire swallowed hard, his pride dissolving with every tick of the clock. The billionaire shifted in his chair, metal scraping against concrete. He had faced presidents and kings, but nothing prepared him for the silent accusation in the girl's eyes. She was young, but her gaze held wisdom beyond her years, an unspoken story of loss and survival. He realized she was not just a victim or a witness, but a mirror, reflecting the void his power could not fill. Through the glass the agents exchanged murmurs, their outlines sharp and still. He wondered if they saw him as a villain, a scapegoat, or simply another casualty of ambition. The girl's rabbit sagged in her grip, its button eyes glinting in the light, a silent reminder of innocence lost. The billionaire tried to speak, his voice cracking, I'm sorry. The words felt hollow in the sterile room. The girl's expression shifted, as if weighing his apology against the enormity of his choices. Somewhere in the storm outside, a siren wailed, echoing the ache inside both their chests. As the minutes dragged on, the billionaire's world shrank to the size of this cell. Every deal, every victory, every loss faded in the face of the present. He realized the girl was waiting. For comfort, for truth, for something he could no longer give. The agents behind the glass made notes, their faces impassive. The billionaire exhaled, his breath shaky, watching the girl's small hands smooth the rabbit's fur. In the silence, his mind replayed every step that led him here, each sacrifice justified by ambition, every warning ignored. He understood now that power was never armor, it was a fragile promise, easily broken. The girl met his eyes one last time, her gaze forgiving and unbearably kind. The billionaire felt the weight of that forgiveness. In that instant, he was not a CEO, not a conqueror, but a man humbled by the cost of his own choices. Outside the storm softened, but inside nothing would ever be the same. The story shifted to a small apartment where a young girl watched her father, defeated and distant, slumped on the couch. The child's eyes were heavy with a promise she whispered to herself. I will never be like him. Her world was filled with empty rooms and broken dreams, but also a fierce determination. She was no longer a bystander to failure but a witness to survival. Her mother worked double shifts, but the weight of their struggles settled most heavily on her small shoulders. This girl, barely 12, sat quietly, tracing cracks in the peeling paint, dreaming of a life where she commanded respect, not pity. The city outside buzzed with opportunity, but inside these walls, the air was thick with silence and loss. The girl clenched her fists, fire igniting inside her young heart. She vowed to rise above the failures she'd inherited. This was no story of privilege, but of raw, relentless hope. Years later, that same girl grew into a young woman rejected from the corporate boardroom where she sought acceptance. Her heels clicked sharply on polished floors, but her heart pounded with every no. The cold glass walls reflected not just her image, but the harsh judgment she felt from every powerful glance. Board members, men and women decades older, whispered behind pursed lips as she stood alone. She had prepared tirelessly, her vision clear, but the room was a battlefield she wasn't welcome in. Outside the skyscraper, the city gleamed with promise she couldn't yet grasp. She felt the sting of exclusion like a physical wound, but beneath the hurt burned a fierce resolve. This was the crucible that would forge her will. Rejection was only the beginning of her story. At a small convenience store, a boy sat on a worn stool, watching his mother plead silently with the store manager for a job. The boy, no older than 10, wore faded clothes and dirt-smudged cheeks, clutching a tattered baseball glove. His mother's voice was low but fierce, eyes burning with desperation and hope. The manager shook his head, regret heavy in his eyes. Outside, the harsh sun beat down on cracked pavement, shadows stretching long across the faded storefront. The boy's heart ached for stability, for a future without constant struggle. He didn't understand why his mother had to beg, why the world seemed so unforgiving. But even in this small moment, a quiet determination flickered inside him, a seed planted in hardship soil. Back in a dimly lit room, the young woman who had faced the cold boardroom stood alone before a cracked mirror. Her reflection stared back with quiet fury and pain. Memories of every rejection, every whispered doubt, flashed behind her eyes. She clenched her fists, fighting the shame that tried to seep into her soul. She wasn't just fighting for a place in the boardroom, she was fighting for herself. The weight of past failures pressed on her shoulders like a storm cloud. But beneath the fear, a fierce fire burned. She whispered to her reflection, I will not be broken. This was the moment she chose to carry the scars, the shame, the fear, and turn them into power. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she would not be defined by the past. The boy at the convenience store grew older, carrying the weight of his mother's sacrifices and the world's cold indifference. He spent countless nights alone, dreaming not of wealth, but of respect, of a life where his voice mattered. He learned early that power was not given. It was earned, often in silence and struggle. His mother's worn hands, his own bruised knuckles, were reminders of the battles fought in shadows. Despite the odds, he promised himself he would rise, not just for survival but to rewrite the story handed to him. Every hardship became fuel, every no, a challenge to prove them wrong. In a world that had overlooked him, he found a fire that refused to be extinguished. This was no ordinary boy. He was a future leader shaped by loss, driven by hope. The young woman's journey began in a cramped co-working space where late nights blended into early mornings. The glow of her laptop illuminated her determined face as she crafted business plans that others dismissed. Sleep was a stranger, birthdays passed unnoticed, forgotten in the blur of deadlines and pitches. Friends faded from her life, replaced by endless calls and meetings. She pitched ideas with fiery passion, yet felt the sting of skepticism behind polite smiles. Every rejection chipped away at her, but she pushed harder, fueled by a vision few could see. Success tasted distant, and victories felt hollow when celebrated alone. Her reflection in the cold glass window reminded her that growth came at a steep price. Yet, she carried on, because giving up was never an option. The future was hers to claim, but the cost was mounting, weighing heavily on her soul. Sleepless nights blurred into exhausted mornings. The young man, now a teenager, balanced part-time jobs while dreaming of building his own future. Lost birthdays and missed family dinners marked his rise, but the sacrifices felt necessary. He carried the weight of expectation and poverty with quiet resolve. Friends drifted away, unable to understand the fire that drove him. Love, once a distraction, became a luxury too costly to maintain. His focus was razor-sharp, a lone soldier in a war for survival and success. Every small win, from a client secured to a positive review, felt like a step forward. But those victories never quite filled the emptiness of the nights spent working alone, chasing a dream that sometimes felt just out of reach. The young woman faced her first major pitch to investors, nerves sharp, but spirit unbroken. Her voice trembled briefly, then steadied as she laid out her vision. The boardroom was stark, the polished table reflecting cold fluorescent lights. The investors scrutinized every word, every gesture. The pressure was immense. A single mistake could undo years of work. She remembered the girl she once was, the one who vowed never to be turned away again, and channeled that fire. Questions came fast and harsh, but she answered with grit and honesty. When the meeting ended, no smiles greeted her departure, only silence and measured nods. She left the room unsure if she'd succeeded, but certain she'd given everything. The battle had begun, and she was ready to fight. The young man made sacrifices few could see. Lost birthdays, forgotten weekends, and lonely nights working double shifts became the foundation of his ascent. Friends wondered why he withdrew, why he declined invitations. Love felt like an impossible dream, something for others, but not for him. Each success came wrapped in exhaustion, each step forward leaving scars on his spirit. But he refused to surrender. The promise he made to himself, that he would rewrite his story, pushed him through fatigue and doubt. In quiet moments, he allowed himself to imagine a future where his past no longer dictated his worth. That vision became a beacon, guiding him through the darkest hours toward a destiny he fought to claim. Amid sleepless nights and sacrifices, the young woman won her first contract. The victory was bittersweet, no celebration, only a quiet moment of relief as she signed the papers alone. The weight of her journey pressed down, reminding her how far she'd come and how far she still must go. She thought of the child who watched a failing father, and promised herself a different path. That promise fueled every decision, every late night, every lost connection. Power had a cost she'd learned to bear, a lonely road paved with both hope and sacrifice. Yet in that small triumph, she found strength to keep moving forward, knowing the battle was far from over, but that she was no longer alone. The foundation of her success began to shake. In a sleek conference room, the young woman stared in disbelief as she discovered the business she had fought for was never fully hers. A trusted co-founder, once an ally, revealed as a sibling hidden by family secrets, complicated by old wounds and betrayals. Her heart pounded as she listened to the whispered confessions, every word unraveling years of hard work. The betrayal was more than professional. It was deeply personal. Her dreams felt fragile, slipping through her fingers like sand. The polished table reflected her shaken expression, cold fluorescent lights amplifying the weight of the revelation. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet, the certainty of her journey shattered. The empire she built was a house of cards, and the truth threatened to bring it all down. The betrayal deepened when she uncovered her mentor had stolen from her, siphoning funds under the guise of guidance. The young woman's trust fractured like shattered glass. Every late night, every sleepless pitch haunted by the shadow of deceit. Her mentor's face, once a beacon of hope, now a mask of greed. She confronted him in a dimly lit office, words heavy with accusation and heartbreak. The mentor offered no apology, only cold justification, widening the chasm between them. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as the betrayal settled like a stone in her chest. It was a devastating blow, threatening to undo her progress and silence her voice. Yet amid the wreckage, a stubborn spark of resilience flared, refusing to let the darkness consume her. As if the betrayals weren't enough, the young woman faced a devastating diagnosis. She was terminally ill. Alone in a sterile hospital room, the weight of mortality pressed heavily against her chest. Doctors spoke in measured tones, words echoing like a death knell. She sat quietly, absorbing the cruel truth, knowing she couldn't share this burden with her team. The journey that had begun with hope now confronted the ultimate enemy, time. She thought of the child she once was, the battles fought, and the empire that might never fully be hers. The disease was silent but relentless, a ticking clock counting down to an uncertain end. Yet even in the shadow of death, she resolved to fight for her legacy, for those she loved, for the future she refused to relinquish. Meanwhile, the young man faced his own collapse. Years of hard work and sacrifice collided with harsh realities. A business deal fell through, leaving him on the brink of bankruptcy. The weight of failure pressed down with brutal force. He sat alone in a dim office, hands trembling, staring at empty bank statements and unanswered calls. Friends had long stopped calling. Love was a distant memory. The future he fought for seemed to crumble beneath him. Yet even as despair threatened to consume him, he found clarity in the wreckage. The loss was profound, but it forced a reckoning, a moment to reassess what mattered most. The path forward was uncertain, but surrender was not an option. He vowed to rise again, stronger and wiser, shaped by every broken piece. The young woman, now frail but unbowed, stood before her team for a final meeting. Her voice, though weakened, carried a fierce clarity. She revealed the truths they needed to hear: betrayals, illness, and the uncertain future. The boardroom, once cold and unwelcoming, now held a charged silence. Faces reflected shock, sorrow, and unexpected empathy. She spoke not as a defeated leader, but as a warrior laying down arms on her terms. A silent pact formed in that room, a legacy not defined by power alone but by courage in the face of collapse. As she concluded, tears glistened in her eyes, but so did a spark of peace. The empire might falter, but her spirit would endure beyond the walls and titles. Change was coming, irreversible and profound. The boardroom was tense, filled with powerful voices and sharper looks. The fate of the empire hung in the balance as a crucial vote approached. The young woman, fragile yet fierce, stood at the center, her weakened frame commanding the room's attention. She knew this moment would redefine everything: the legacy she built, the sacrifices made, the dreams crushed and born anew. The silence before the vote was thick with anticipation. Allies and adversaries alike watched, some with hope, others with cold calculation. Her voice broke the stillness, steady and clear despite exhaustion, pleading for understanding, for mercy, for a future that honored the struggle. The weight of the decision pressed down, massive and irreversible. The empire's destiny rested on a knife's edge, and she was the last to speak. The vote began, voices rising in measured tones, each word heavy with consequence. The room fractured between those who saw her as a symbol of courage, and those who deemed the empire's survival more important than sentiment. Every raised hand echoed in her chest like a hammer blow. Her heart raced, the air thick with silence and expectation. She locked eyes with a few supporters, finding strength in their quiet nods. The decision was more than business, it was deeply personal. When the final tally came, the room held its breath. The empire's future had been cast, a choice that could not be undone. She felt the weight lift and descend all at once, the crushing victory of survival paired with the bitter cost of compromise. After the vote, she found a quiet corner and delivered a speech that rippled through the company's heart. Her voice faltered at times but carried a fierce conviction. She spoke of sacrifice, resilience, and the price of power. Apologies mingled with gratitude, hope with pain. Employees listened, many moved to tears, feeling the raw honesty beneath her fragile exterior. The speech was more than words, it was a bridge between past mistakes and future possibilities. She knew it might be too late for some, but it was a start. The empire's soul had been shaken but not broken. Her final words lingered in the air. We rise not because we never fall, but because we choose to stand again. In a quiet hallway far from the spotlight, the young woman shared a silent embrace with her estranged father. Words were unnecessary. Years of conflict, misunderstanding and pain compressed into a single moment of connection. The weight of their shared past pressed between them, but for once, hope flickered. The hug was a fragile truce, a recognition that some battles were beyond business and ambition. In that embrace, the legacy was no longer about power or empire. It was about forgiveness and love. Outside, distant city noises faded as the moment stretched timeless. Both felt the heavy cost of what had been lost, and the fragile promise of what might still be found. As the empire's towers loomed outside, the young woman sat alone, contemplating the future. The legacy she fought for was not what she had imagined, messy, fragile, and incomplete. Yet in the quiet, she found peace. Power had exacted its toll, but it had also shaped her. She wasn't just a CEO, she was a survivor, a leader tempered by loss and love. The final decision was no longer about the empire, but about who she chose to become. The world would remember the fall, but she would carry the rise within her heart forever. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to define, no longer untouchable, but profoundly human. In the quiet aftermath, the father who had once lost everything found himself rebuilding not just a company but his fractured relationship with the world. His hands, roughened by years of struggle, now steadied with purpose. He knew the cost of absence, of choices made in shadows and silence. Yet here, in the slow rhythm of recovery, he discovered a new kind of power, one born of humility and sacrifice. The empire was no longer his kingdom alone. It was a legacy to protect and nurture for those who would come after. Each decision was weighed with care, each action a step toward healing. The man who missed so much now vowed to be present in every moment that mattered. This was not a redemption story of grandeur, but of quiet, steady love. The young woman, having relinquished power, embraced a path toward self-discovery far from the boardrooms and headlines. She walked through serene forests and quiet parks, the natural world soothing her weary spirit. Freed from the constant pressure to prove herself, she found joy in small moments, a child's laughter, the rustling of leaves, the calm of dawn. Her identity was no longer tied to titles or empires, but to the woman she was becoming. She learned to forgive herself for past mistakes and to cherish the imperfect beauty of her journey. Each breath was a meditation, each step a reclaiming of peace. In giving up power, she gained something far more profound: freedom to be wholly herself. The boy who once begged at the store now stood tall, a young man with dreams bigger than the worn streets he'd left behind. His journey had been shaped by struggle, but also by resilience and fierce hope. He now led a community initiative, offering support to those facing hardship like he once did. The scars of his past did not define him, they fueled his compassion. He spoke with quiet confidence at meetings, inspiring others to believe in change. The world had not always been kind, but he refused to be broken by it. In every smile he encouraged, every hand he lifted, he honored the promise made long ago in quiet moments of determination. His story was no longer just survival, it was transformation. The young woman's legacy was no longer measured in profits or headlines, but in the lives she touched and the courage she inspired. Stories of her resilience circulated quietly, passed from one heart to another, sparking hope in those who faced their own battles. She had become a symbol not of invincibility, but of bravery in vulnerability. Her journey showed that true power often came from surrender, from the willingness to face pain and emerge changed. The empire she built may have faltered, but the impact of her spirit endured. She taught that leadership is as much about sacrifice as success, and that sometimes the greatest victories come after the fall. Her story was a quiet revolution, whispered but unyielding. In a moment of stillness, the father and daughter reunited, not as CEOs or conquerors, but as two souls seeking peace. The years of distance and pain dissolved in quiet conversation and shared memories. They spoke of what was lost and what might still be found in forgiveness. The company they once built was only a backdrop to the deeper legacy of family and love. As they looked toward a future shaped by understanding, they embraced the imperfect beauty of second chances. The past could not be rewritten, but their bond could be renewed. In that fragile, tender moment, they found hope, not in power, but in connection. The story was no longer about empires, but about healing. The final chapter opened in a quiet, minimalist apartment, where the young woman faced her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes held a mixture of sorrow and strength, the years of battle etched softly on her face. Outside, fireworks erupted across the night sky, casting fleeting light through the window. She stood motionless, letting the silence fill the room. The empire she once ruled was gone, but she was still here, fragile, human, and whole. The reflection staring back was no longer the CEO who had chased power, but a woman who had survived loss and found grace. A single line echoed in her mind, "He left the company, but never left her." It was a quiet truth, a final testament to love beyond titles and towers. The fireworks painted her silhouette in bursts of color, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Meanwhile, the father, once a titan of industry, sat alone before a tall glass window overlooking the city skyline. His face was weathered, eyes deep with contemplation. The city's lights flickered like distant stars, but his gaze was inward, focused on memories and regrets. Behind him, a small stack of old photographs lay untouched. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint hum of life outside. He knew he had lost much but gained a new understanding of what mattered. The empire was no longer his, but the daughter he had left behind remained a part of him, always. The weight of that realization settled gently on his shoulders, softening the sharp edges of pride and pain. In the quiet he whispered a promise, "I never left her." A child's hand reached up slowly toward the polished boardroom chair, untouched but shining beneath the fluorescent lights. The room was empty now, echoes of decisions past hanging in the air. The child, no more than 7, gazed with wide curiosity and quiet hope. This hand, small and tentative, represented the future, one unburdened by the mistakes of those before. Somewhere in the distance, laughter and footsteps stirred the air with promise. The chair, once a symbol of power and isolation, now stood as a silent witness to the cycle of ambition and redemption. The story was far from over. It was only just beginning. The city outside continued to pulse with life, unaware of the quiet revolutions taking place within its towers. Stories of triumph and failure wove through the streets, like invisible threads. The young woman walked past the bustling crowds, no longer chasing titles but living fully, in each moment. Her pace was steady, her smile genuine. She carried the scars of her journey not as burdens but as badges of resilience. The legacy she left behind was not carved in stone, but breathed in every person she touched. The future was uncertain, but ripe with possibility. The city's lights reflected in her eyes, a reminder that even after darkness, there was always dawn. The story closed with a silent, lingering shot of a mirror, reflecting the young woman's face as fireworks exploded outside. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, a testament to the battles fought and the peace found. The empire had fallen, the power relinquished, but the soul remained unbroken. She breathed deeply, the weight of the past lifting with each breath. The fireworks burst again, painting the room in vivid light, a final cinematic gut punch that left silence, tears, and hope. The story was hers, unfinished but alive, ready to inspire those who dared to dream beyond what seemed untouchable.